You're about to hear a story that doesn't feel real. An army of nearly 1 million soldiers, gone in just 11 days. Not slowly, not after months of fighting, gone. And what makes it even more disturbing is that this didn't happen because they were weak. It happened because they didn't understand what was coming. Because before a single shot was fired, before the first tank crossed the border, before the sky filled with aircraft, the outcome was already decided. The only thing left was time. They believed they were ready. They had numbers. They had land. They had a name that carried fear across Asia: the Kwantung Army. For years, this force had been the symbol of Japanese power on the continent. It didn't just follow orders, it created its own. It had taken control of entire regions, built a reputation for speed, aggression, and control. People didn't question it, they feared it. But power has a strange weakness. It can look strong, long after it has already started to break. Because while the world was focused somewhere else, while battles raged across the Pacific, while cities were burning under bombings, something quiet was happening inside that army, something no one wanted to admit. The best soldiers were gone, pulled away, reassigned, sent into desperate battles Japan was already losing. The elite units that once made this army dangerous were no longer there. What remained looked the same. Same uniforms, same structure, same name. But inside, it was different. Inexperienced recruits, men with barely any training, commanders who had never faced modern mechanized warfare, old tanks, weak weapons, limited fuel. They were preparing for a kind of war that no longer existed. And deep down, some of them knew it. Years earlier, they had already faced this enemy once, in 1939. And what happened then was a warning. They were surrounded, outmaneuvered, destroyed faster than they expected. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a lesson, a very clear one. But lessons only matter if you have the ability to change. By 1945, they didn't. No time, no resources, no real chance to rebuild. And yet, they stayed. They built defenses. They held positions. They waited. Because in their minds, this would still be a war, a fight, a chance, a resistance. They were wrong. Because what was coming was not designed to fight them. It was designed to break them. Fast, clean, completely. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. Not step by step, but deep inside where they felt safe. And when it started, nothing behaved the way they expected. There were no clear front lines, no time to prepare, no moment to understand. Only confusion, then panic, then silence. Because in just a few days, units stopped responding, commands stopped reaching, and soldiers began to realize something terrifying. The enemy wasn't in front of them, it was already behind them. And by the time they understood, it was already too late. They thought this would be a war. Something they could fight, something they could survive. But what was coming was something else entirely. They still believed they had a chance. That's the part that makes this story unsettling. Because from the outside, everything still looked like an army. There were divisions, there were commanders, there were tanks, artillery, aircraft. On paper, it was one of the largest forces in Asia. But wars are not decided on paper. They are decided by what's real. And what was real was something very different. Because behind the numbers, there was a quiet collapse. The strongest units were gone, not weakened, gone. Pulled out months earlier, sent to defend islands that were already falling. Philippines, Okinawa. Everywhere Japan was desperate, they took the best from this army. What remained was never meant to fight a war like this. New recruits, teenagers, reservists, men who had barely held a weapon before. Some had only weeks of training, some even less. and they were placed on a front line that stretched for thousands of kilometers, expected to hold it against an enemy they already feared. Because this enemy was not unknown. They had seen it before. In 1939, they faced Soviet forces in a battle that ended in complete disaster. Encircled, cut off, destroyed. Not because they lacked courage, but because they were fighting the wrong kind of war. And now, nothing had changed. Their doctrine was outdated, rigid, predictable. They believed in static defense. Hold the line, protect positions, wait for the enemy to attack head-on. But what they didn't understand was that the next war would not come from the front. It would come from everywhere. Their tanks? Outdated, thin armor, weak guns, machines designed for a different era. Their Air Force? Limited. Fuel shortages kept many aircraft grounded, and those that could fly were no match for modern fighters. Their artillery? Present, but without enough ammunition to sustain real combat. And the most dangerous problem of all, they had no mobility, no fast units, no reserves, no way to respond once the line was broken. And when a line breaks in modern war, everything behind it becomes exposed. Some officers understood this. They saw the signs. They knew what would happen if the Soviets attacked. But knowing didn't give them options. Because by 1945, Japan was already losing everywhere. Cities were burning, supplies were collapsing, command structures were under pressure. There was no ability to rebuild, no ability to adapt. Only one option remained: hold. Hold the line, hold the illusion, hold the belief that this could still be controlled. And so they did. They built fortifications, bunkers, defensive lines, positions meant to stop a direct assault. But those defenses were designed for the past, for slow wars, for predictable enemies, not for what was coming. Because the next attack would not respect lines. It would not slow down. It would not wait. It would move faster than their ability to think. And when it hit, there would be no second chance. Because the most dangerous moment in any war is not when you are weak. It's when you still believe you are strong. And that's exactly where they were, standing on a collapsing system, believing it would hold, preparing for a battle that was never going to happen. Because what was coming next was not a fight for territory. It was a system designed to break armies completely. And when it began, it wouldn't matter how many soldiers they had. Because numbers don't save you when you're surrounded before the war even starts. It didn't begin the way they expected. No warning, no slow build-up, no moment to prepare. It began all at once, in the dark, across thousands of kilometers, from multiple directions at the same time. And within the first hours, everything started to break. They were waiting for an attack from the front. That's how wars were supposed to work. You defend, you hold the line, you respond. But this time, there was no line. Because while some units were still looking forward, others were already being hit from the side, and some from behind. At first, it didn't make sense. Reports came in, fragmented, unclear. Enemy movement detected, units under pressure, contact lost. Then silence. Entire sectors stopped responding. Commanders tried to reach their positions. No answer, no signal, nothing. And then came the realization. Slow at first, then all at once. This wasn't an attack. This was something else. Because the Soviets didn't move like a normal army. They didn't push forward step by step. They didn't stop to fight every position. They went through. Fast, relentless, precise. Tank columns didn't slow down. They didn't wait for infantry. They didn't wait for resistance to collapse. They bypassed it. Strong points that were meant to stop an invasion were left behind, ignored, cut off. Soldiers inside bunkers waited for the enemy that never came. Because the enemy was already somewhere else, deep inside, hundreds of kilometers beyond where they were supposed to be. Railways were taken, cities were reached, communication centers were gone, and the front stopped existing. This was not a breakthrough, it was a collapse, and it happened faster than anyone thought possible. In some areas, Soviet units advanced over 100 kilometers in a single day. Think about that. An army moving faster than the information about it. By the time a message was sent, it was already outdated. By the time an order was given, it no longer mattered, because the situation had already changed, again and again and again. This speed did something even more dangerous than destruction. It created confusion. Units didn't know where the enemy was, because the enemy was everywhere. Ahead, behind, on the flanks, there was no safe direction. Officers tried to organize defenses, but where do you defend when you don't know where the attack is coming from? Some units tried to hold positions. They were surrounded. Some tried to retreat. They ran into Soviet forces already waiting. Others didn't even realize they were in danger until tanks appeared out of nowhere, and by then, it was already over. This was the moment everything changed, not because of firepower, not because of numbers, but because reality itself no longer made sense. The war they trained for didn't exist anymore, and the new one was already happening around them, without rules, without pauses, without mercy. Every hour made it worse. Every movement made it tighter. Every attempt to respond made them more exposed. Because this wasn't about pushing them back, it was about surrounding them, breaking them, erasing their ability to function. And once that happens in war, everything else follows. Command collapses, coordination disappears, and an army turns into scattered groups of men, alone, confused, and already too late. They thought they would fight a battle, but what they were experiencing was something much more dangerous, a system designed to destroy them before they could even react. And as the Soviet forces kept moving deeper, faster, unstoppable, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't the beginning of the war. This was the beginning of the end. At first, it was confusion. Then, it turned into something else. Panic. Not the loud kind, not immediately. The quiet kind. The kind that spreads before anyone says it out loud. Because something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Orders stopped making sense. Positions that were safe were suddenly under attack. Units that were supposed to hold disappeared. And no one could explain why. Commanders tried to take control. They issued new orders, reorganized defenses, tried to create some kind of structure. But every decision came too late. Because by the time an order reached the front no longer existed. It had already moved, broken, collapsed, and with it, everything else. Communication was gone, not weakened, gone. Phones didn't work, radios went silent, messengers never returned. Entire divisions were cut off from reality. Imagine fighting a war without knowing where your enemy is, without knowing where your allies are, without knowing if anyone is even still fighting. That's where they were. And then came the moment no army can survive. Encirclement. Not partial, not temporary, complete. From multiple directions, at the same time. Some units tried to fight. They held positions, fired until they ran out of ammunition. But it didn't change anything. Because they weren't stopping the enemy. They were being bypassed, ignored, left behind. And once you are surrounded, every second works against you. Supplies run out. Ammunition disappears. Food becomes scarce. Hope fades even faster. Others tried to retreat. That was worse, because retreat requires direction, and there was none. They moved, only to find Soviet forces already there, blocking roads, cutting railways, waiting. Every escape route was already closed. And slowly, something inside the army broke. Not their weapons, not their numbers, their belief. Because war is not just about fighting. It's about believing you can still win. And when that disappears, everything else follows. Groups of soldiers began to surrender, not because they wanted to, because they had no alternative. Some resisted, fought to the last moment, refused to give up. But they were isolated, outnumbered, surrounded, and eventually silenced. The speed of it all made it worse. This wasn't months, not weeks, days. Entire formations that once covered massive territory were gone in days. Thousands surrendered at once, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. It didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like something collapsing in real time, a system failing, one part at a time, until nothing remained. And then came the numbers. More than 80,000 killed, hundreds of thousands captured. An army that once dominated a continent no longer existed. Not defeated, gone. And the most terrifying part? It didn't happen because they lacked courage. It happened because they were trapped in a war they didn't understand, fighting an enemy that had already figured everything out. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already over. They thought they would fight. They thought they would resist. They thought they had time. They had none. Because this was never about winning battles. It was about ending them completely. By the time it ended, there was nothing left to fight. Not because every soldier was gone, but because the army itself no longer existed. In just 11 days, one of the largest forces in Asia collapsed completely. Hundreds of thousands captured, tens of thousands dead, entire divisions erased from the map. But what happened in those 11 days didn't stay there, because the real impact was happening somewhere else, far from the battlefield, in Tokyo, where leaders were already under pressure, already searching for a way out, already trying to avoid the one thing they feared the most: complete surrender. For months, they believed they still had options. They thought they could negotiate, delay the inevitable, find a way to end the war on their terms. And there was one hope they were holding on to: the Soviet Union. Even though they were enemies, there was still a fragile neutrality, a possibility, a chance that the Soviets could act as mediators, a way out. But in a single moment, that illusion disappeared. Because on August 9th, everything changed. The Soviets didn't mediate, they invaded. And not slowly, not cautiously, completely. At the exact same time, Japan was already facing something else: 2 atomic bombs. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Cities destroyed in seconds. Shock, destruction, fear. But even after that, there was still hesitation. Because Japan had endured destruction before: fire bombings, mass casualties, cities burning. And still, they continued. But this was different, because now, it wasn't just destruction from above, it was collapse from within. Their strongest army on the mainland was gone. Not retreating, not holding, gone. And with it, any hope of control, any hope of negotiation, any hope of time. Because now they faced something impossible: a war on 2 fronts. From the south, the United States. From the north, the Soviet Union. And unlike before, there was no buffer, no distance, no delay, only pressure, immediate, relentless, unavoidable. Every hour mattered, because every hour more territory was lost, more soldiers captured, more control slipping away. And for the first time, the reality became clear. If they didn't surrender now, there would be nothing left to surrender. The decision could no longer be delayed. And then it happened. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke, not to his generals, not to his government, to his people, announcing something that had never happened before: Japan would surrender, officially, completely, ending the war. And while history remembers the bombs, what happened in Manchuria was just as decisive. Because it didn't just destroy an army, it destroyed the illusion that the war could continue. It removed every option, every delay, every possibility of control, and replaced it with one thing: reality. That this was over, that the outcome had already been decided, and that everything that followed was just time catching up. In 11 days, the balance of power in Asia shifted completely. The Soviet Union emerged as a dominant force. Territories were taken. Influence expanded. The map changed. But behind all of that was something deeper, a message. That in modern war, it's not always the strongest army that wins. It's the one that understands the future before the other even realizes the present has changed. Because the Kwantung army didn't just lose. They were fighting a war that no longer existed, against an enemy that had already moved on. And in that gap between past and future, they disappeared. 11 days. That's all it took. Not to win a battle, but to end an army, end a strategy, end a war. And remind the world of something brutal. Some defeats happen long before the fighting begins.